And now let's begin. I'd like to turn today's webinar over to your presenters, Nick Hayes of Forrester Research and Devin Redman of Nexgate, now a division of Proofpoint, along with your moderator, Robert Cruz of Proofpoint. And with that, Robert, you have the floor.
Excellent. Thank you, Marvin. And thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone for joining. I appreciate you spending the next hour with us. The focus of this hour is going to be on social media risk and compliance in 2015. This discussion is going to be focused around how organizations are bringing social under control. And I'm very happy to have joined with me today two special guests. Nick Hayes, analyst from Forrester Research, primarily covering the areas of social risk management and compliance, and also Devin Redman, general manager of Nexgate, now a division of Proofpoint. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. I look forward to listening to your insights over the course of the next hour.
Glad to be here.
Great, Nick, thank you. And so let me set the agenda first of all. What we're going to cover over this next hour is a brief introduction into Proofpoint as an organization, some of the things that we provide as a company for those that may not be as familiar with the capabilities of Proofpoint. We're then going to get into the subject of the lessons learned from 2014. What are some of the things that early adopting organizations have experienced? And what can we project forward into 2015 in terms of the way that organizations should be thinking about social media, in particular from an information management and a regulatory compliance perspective? We'll then give you a little bit more information on the back end, talking about the product and some of the capabilities we have in this area, and we'll leave some time in the back end for questions and answers. Most likely, given the number of folks that are on the line, we'll not be able to cover all the questions, but what we will commit to is being able to deliver those back to you in email as soon as the webinar is complete. So let's begin. So Proofpoint as an organization, for those that don't know us as well, what the organization is about, what we have focused on since the very beginning of our organization in 2002 is helping organizations to protect critical information. And that's something that started with our capabilities around data protection, helping organizations to protect against malware and spam and other threats that were facing the organization. That's expanded and grown over time as threats have become more targeted, have become things that organizations realize can cause significant harm to the organization. So our targeted attack protection capabilities there, now complemented with our threat response solutions, or helping organizations to stay a step ahead of those with intent to do harm. We've complemented that with capabilities in the area of data privacy, helping organizations to employ policy-driven encryption, as well as helping to control critical content, being able to ensure that policy violations are spotted so that compliance teams can take proactive action in front of those events occurring. And finally, within the portfolio, we have our capabilities around archiving and governance. This includes our Enterprise Archive product, providing the capability to retain, to preserve, to search against all information that's contained within email, instant messages, social content, so that organizations can be better prepared to deal with e-discovery and regulatory compliance. This portfolio, this capability also includes our capabilities in enterprise governance. In that area, it's about the notion of controlling files and documents in the wild, allowing organizations to be able to identify the information that may be leaking to locations that are not under management, so that you can take control and help alleviate any concerns that may be raised regarding regulatory compliance, and also help efficiently dispose of the information that no longer needs to exist. And finally, within the social archiving space, providing the capability to be able to capture and control within our archiving infrastructure the Twitters, the Facebooks, the LinkedIns, the Yammers, the Chatters, so that you can extend your compliance control to be able to deal with these emerging content types. This entire platform is built upon the cloud, which provides to us the ability to leverage shared resources and also gain greater insight so that you continue to see these solutions be effective as those data volumes continue to grow. With these capabilities, we've now extended through the addition of Nexgate. And with that, let me introduce Devin, who can talk a little bit about its capabilities and how it fits into the portfolio. Devin, over to you.
Thank you, Robert, and thanks everyone for joining us. Special thanks to Nick for being on the call as well. I'm very happy to be here and have Nexgate be part of the Proofpoint family. Just to give the folks on the line a little bit of context, Nexgate has been in the social media security space, social media risk management and compliance space for the last 3 years, kind of pioneering the efforts to provide a dedicated layer of communication security. For further context on the market and on the space, one thing that I think has escaped a lot of people's attention is the fact that social media has become part of the communication infrastructure mix for most organizations, whether you're a Fortune 100 or whether you're a retailer in a small town in a small area. Social media has become part of your communication infrastructure. Much like email is part of your communication infrastructure, so is social media. The fact that most organizations and most enterprises have over 300 accounts that they're running as a brand, and these aren't their social sellers, these aren't employee accounts, these are brand-run accounts. And on those accounts are hundreds of thousands of pieces of content that have been communicated back and forth with that brand, should be something that folks are paying attention to as part of their communication mix. What that really means from a security and compliance perspective is that the first challenge is figuring out what is that infrastructure, right? What accounts do I have? How many Facebook pages? How many Twitter accounts? How many YouTube channels are out there representing my organization? So being able to find and track those, assess risk on them, figure out if you have fraudulent accounts and getting those shut down. Then from beyond that kind of perspective of knowing what the footprint is, being able to protect it, so keeping it from being hacked, having good controls over those accounts so that you know who has access, so that you can enforce which publishing tools are being used, and then importantly, dealing with all of the content on those accounts, whether it's coming from external through the multitude of mechanisms for sharing that information back in, direct messages, wall posts, comments, all of those types of things, and making sure that's free from abuse, free from malware and spam being transmitted on those accounts. And then most importantly, also looking at what's going out and making sure that all of those communications are compliant, they stick within your regulatory guidelines or your corporate governance guidelines, and then beyond that, making sure that once it goes into an archive and is retained, you have the proper capabilities to supervise. So that's a key point on that front. In terms of combining the two entities, this is a phenomenal thing to have a dedicated security player that has the breadth of capabilities that we can now bring to market, whether it's leading enforcement capabilities around security, leading enforcement capabilities around compliance controls, or the ability to then take that and intelligently put it into a next-generation archive where it's easy to deal with supervision and it's easy to find that data. Nobody else in the market can bring that layer of security and compliance controls into the space like Proofpoint now can. And what's probably most important in addition to analyst recognition on that front is the customers that analysts and folks like Nick talk to voting around these types of technologies. And you can see a tremendous amount of traction, whether you're looking at financial services and heavily regulated industries in particular, or whether you're actually looking outside of that, understanding that that is a massive footprint of customers and over 45% of the Fortune 100 in that space. Just taking a look at that and understanding there's a tremendous amount of validation there. But I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. We can get a little bit into the technology after this. Why don't we skip to the Q&A and let Nick share some of his learnings in the space, and we can take it from there.
Thanks, Devin. And let me reintroduce Nick. Nick, thank you very much for joining us. And, you know, the focus of today and, you know, where we really are looking for your insights here are where organizations have been over the course of 2014. We had the last webinar focused on what companies can expect to occur with regard to regulatory and other drivers that were affecting the use of social. So now we have the opportunity to look back and see what best practices have emerged, what have companies learned through their experiences in leveraging social in 2014, and what can you expect into 2015. So, you know, in particular, as we focus on the enterprise side of social, those use cases inside of an organization, you know, regulated organizations and others, let's talk about some of these things that companies have realized, you know, starting with the notion of ROI. You know, what returns have companies seen? What are the benefits they've been able to realize in order to, you know, in kind of summarizing your experiences and touch points with customers over the course of the year?
Yeah, so great introduction, both by Devin and by Rob. So really happy to be here today and talking about all these really important issues and emerging threats that are starting to really struggle or complicate matters for a lot of organizations today. I've been at Forrester for about 5 years now, and I started covering governance, risk, and compliance, and that still is definitely where I spend some of my research efforts on. But in the past 3 years or so, I'd say I've been
increasingly focused on the emerging risk and compliance issues related to social media. And over the past even just 3 years, there have been a lot of changes in the overall environment, a lot of changes to the threat landscape, a lot of the legal and regulatory issues that are emerging are still changing really quickly. But a lot of the times that we're talking about a lot of the risk issues, the security threats, and we forget that the whole purpose of this is that there's real business benefits to how we're using social today. And that's something that I think we can all agree that today social media is something it's really here to stay at this point. The benefits of how we're using social media extend beyond just marketing. They go into social selling. They're going into other areas from HR, recruiting, as well as into research and development, innovation. There's so many different purposes for monitoring and engaging on social media today. And so when we talk about a lot of the social media, hashtag sales that are happening, there's so many more things that are going right with how people are using social media. Elon Musk actually attributes social media for its quick turnaround, and Tesla's quick turnaround when all of a sudden there were a couple cars that appeared to be blowing up or catching on fire and were posted on YouTube. And they were able to invalidate a lot of the comments and a lot of the inaccurate information that was out on the web through their social networks. And so he attributes social media to that quick turnaround and being able to get out the right information, the accurate information about their company, minimizing the brand reputation and damage that could have been done. So overall, social media, it's really helping organizations enhance their brand and reputation. And in fact, there's been a couple studies done, one by the Stanford Business School that actually shows that social media is helping improve the market liquidity of organizations. It's helping them raise more capital, improve their overall presence in the market, getting more attention to media outlets, all of that's actually really positive behavior that's growing their organizations, growing their bottom lines. But beyond that, it's also helping organizations deepen their customer relationships. It's helping sales professionals figure out ways to engage with customers at the right moments in time. And so Morgan Stanley actually found that of the 40% of its financial advisors that were engaging on social media during its pilot program were actually able to find new business and curate new business opportunities through social networks, including one financial advisor that actually closed a $70 million account that started on LinkedIn. So right there, that one account right there is totally worth all the effort that is going in and all of the reasons why we need to be on social media. And so the other part is that it's also helping not just sales or marketing, but really all of your employees. It's empowering them to get their jobs done in better, more efficient ways. And actually, according to one study that we did, it's your career-driven employees that want to use it. When we asked the question, do you use public social media for work, we found that the career-focused ones, those that care about their job, that are really striving to do as well as they can every day at work, those are the ones that are twice as likely to want to use social media for work purposes, not just to go on and connect with family and friends and all of that, but actually get their job done in a more effective manner. And even beyond that, too, it's all of a sudden becoming a very important part for marketing leaders to help curate the right content for all the organization to leverage the entire workforce. We did one study to global marketing leaders, and 100% of them, every single one, said that social media is a new important, actually, I'm sorry, not social media, but basically having employees be advocates for the brand is very necessary today. So with all this...
Great points, Nick. Just to add one thing,
yeah.
I think your notion of career-driven employees being very active in social, I think there's also studies within specific industries, financial as an example, where they've shown that broker-dealers that are more active in social also have, there's a correlation between that and actually, generating higher returns for the company. So, many data points to support your comment there.
Yeah, exactly. So there's just so many potential use cases for social media, and organizations are really leveraging that across industries and across departments within their own companies.
Terrific. So the benefits, I think, are clear. The productivity, the incremental sales, the ability to get a closer relationship with your customers, your suppliers. Let's turn to the other side of the equation. Let's talk about the information protection, the regulatory compliance, the other risk factors that organizations are attempting to bring in control. Harnessing social, but at the same time recognizing that these are the constraints that the business needs to operate within. What can you tell us about what organizations have learned in terms of their control over social over the past 12 months?
Yeah, another really good question, and it's a really difficult question to answer because, and to really figure out how to deal with, because when we talk about managing social media risk, when we talk about how you're controlling social, both two different sides of the house are really, of your organization are really feel like they have responsibilities, that they have a role in social media. And so there's both the IT decision makers, people within IT, information security, privacy, compliance, that all feel and have a very important role in managing social media. But on the flip side, the business is also very involved as well for all the business benefits, all the reasons why we're allowing social media and for everyone to be using it. And so when we talk about this, when we ask the question to global enterprise business and IT decision makers, how they feel responsible is about the same, which means that when we talk about how you're actually building support and you're actually figuring out how to get the right activities started within your company, you have to both market and advocate for social media controls on both sides. And so it's a very different conversation, and the reasons why each set of professionals is overlooking the potential benefits of trying to control social media are very different. So when we start talking about the business or we start talking about the marketing side, it's because they don't necessarily understand the inherent risks. They share account credentials across large teams. They don't understand their brand's full social presence, and they're not thinking about the legal or regulatory issues that are involved with every decision and every post that they're making. And then on the flip side, when we're talking about these IT decision makers and the risk and compliance areas, the social media aspects still feel very benign to them. It's something that there are too many other competing priorities, whether it's security or compliance. Social media tends to fall to the bottom of the list. So thinking about those two groups, there are definite ways that you can start building internal support, but you have to be very prescriptive in how you're doing it. And so,
right. That's a great point, Nick. I know Devin had a comment here as well as far as the multiple stakeholders and others that are shaping the requirements for these sorts of projects. I think Devin, you've indicated this is also something that you run into frequently.
Yeah, absolutely. We see oftentimes in customers multiple stakeholders in this environment, and the business always tends to run ahead, which they should, right? That's their job, is to drive more activity, more productivity, and ultimately, hopefully, more profits in that environment. And so what happens is if there's not enough unity in those groups, you tend to see the business running ahead, and then security challenged with the fact that they haven't really been involved in the conversation for the reasons that Nick exactly mentioned before, right? They've got competing priorities. They've got to deal with a whole slew of threats and risks out there, and they haven't been part of that conversation. But social, due to its consumerized nature, its frictionless nature, goes without them. And so then there's that reconciliation factor of how do you then catch up from a security and compliance perspective and kind of build a program and a plan around that. And a lot of the conversations we have with customers, just like Nick, is around how do you get those stakeholders at the table and catch up with what's already happening so that you don't inhibit the business at the same time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So to me, there's definitely a lot of education that's going on just to understand what that threat landscape is, what their presence is, all of that. And so that's one of the ways where I definitely see you being able to gain internal support is when you have that crisis that happens, whether you're the Associated Press and your Twitter account gets hacked by the Syrian Electronic Army, or you start getting enforcement letters, sweeps letters from FINRA, or a number of different other areas where you just have a PR crisis. For example, when United Airways posted a pornographic image in response to a customer complaint. There's so many other types of social media crises that come up that as soon as it happens and it's understood what went wrong, often it's because the right resources, the right technology, the right capabilities they don't have in place. And so when you have that type of crisis, of course it's something that you're able to get the necessary resources to make sure it doesn't happen again. But how you prevent that and you gain internal support before it happens is really the important part. And so one way that you can try to do that is try to highlight some of these existing cases that have already happened, using what we call FUD, so fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But what we find is that only goes so far. You can scare them, you can really highlight all these potential risks, but again, that's only going to help once or twice. Doing that multiple times is not going to go over well because they're just going to believe that you're either crying wolf or something else that basically diminishes the overall message that you're trying to send.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I just wanted to come back to that as far as what can be done in order to take action prior to the crisis. But I think there's one specific element I wanted to touch on here as well that we spent time with last time, and that's the regulatory environment, because clearly there's been a year of a lot of action, guidance from FFIEC and from FCA in Europe, and FDA still, delaying their guidance, for another round. What are customers telling you? What are companies saying as far as their understanding of regulatory and data privacy requirements today?
So the legal and regulatory landscape continues to remain murky. I continue to get a number of questions on this from organizations in different industries, and still there's just a lot of ambiguity and a lack of clarity around what to do, what are the right steps, and it's because the legal and regulatory the regulatory bodies are still playing catch up. When we think about social media, it seems like it's been around for a really long time now, but Facebook is only 10 years old, and Twitter's not too much. It's actually younger than that. And when we think about this in the context of how long these laws and regulations have been around, decades, maybe even centuries, it takes a while for all of the rules and regulations to catch up and to figure out how social media is really affecting the different policies and the different mandates that they've already had in place for a long time. And so if you just think about this actually on a personal note, when you think about how you're doing your own job and how you're working with coworkers, it's actually there's a lot of gray areas when we think about that. Like, is it okay to friend your coworkers? Is it okay to, if you're a manager, to friend the people that you're managing? There's just all these new areas that are still being worked out, and the best practices, the status quo is still not defined yet. And so, in addition to that, there are a lot of new questions coming out because regulatory guidance is starting to roll out. Some have been around for a couple of years now when we think about FINRA, and the FFIEC actually just finalized its social media guidance last December. But there's a number of new issues, and if you actually look at the different icons at the bottom of this slide, each one has each regulatory body that represents has pushed forward new guidance or draft guidance around social media, or at the very least has started hosting different sessions around asking the questions about what their role should be. So when we think about all of this and we think about how quickly these are changing and evolving, there's a lot of questions about what to do and how to do it right. And the warning letters and the legal cases of the guidance that has come out are continuing to happen and unfold. So there's this one example of Cole Haan just this year. It started a marketing campaign called Wandering Soul on Pinterest, and it was asking consumers to take pictures and pin boards with Cole Haan products. And if the customers did, and it didn't just have to be a customer, but anyone did, they would be entered into a prize drawing. The FTC actually took issue with this campaign because all of those pins became sponsored ads. Since essentially each one of those ads was an incentive, they were offering incentives to participate. So in order to meet the guidelines that the FTC has pushed out around making sure that every post is clear and conspicuous and using hashtags, of course all of those consumers that were posting and participating weren't adding those hashtags. And then another case is actually with a pharmaceutical organization called Zarbee's Naturals. The FDA sent them a warning letter this year because the FDA took issue with the fact that Zarbee's Facebook presence contained liked posts and comments that promoted unapproved false claims about the benefits and effects of the products they were selling. So just a number of different issues that keep coming up with legal cases being defined and defining how how organizations can actually push out social media policies at the corporate level. The National Labor Relations Board has actually pushed back on large organizations like Target and Costco and Best Buy around their social media policies, saying that they're overly broad. So just a number of different issues. And these questions continue to persist even for well-established roles where we think about, and one of the major ones we think about is FINRA. But even there's still a lot of questions from organizations around how to meet a lot of the archiving requirements, how to make sure that the entanglement and third-party content endorsements that are on there are actually how they meet those standards. So anyway, a lot of issues still exist when we talk about the legal and regulatory landscape, and that's definitely going to continue as we head into 2015.
Yeah, and I think that there's some great points there in terms of case law and also regulatory sanctions that are coming down. But let's talk about some of the unique elements of social relative to email, instant messages, other forms of communication. I think it further complicates the question of how do you ensure this information is under control. So highlight a couple of things that social uniquely creates in terms of the ability for an organization to bring that within the realm of IT control.
Right. So in some ways, social media is fairly similar to email. When we think about the core of the reason we're using it is to communicate, to collaborate with people. But of course, social media is very different and introduces a myriad new issues. First off, organizations, they don't control the accounts or the infrastructure, which means that your employees are the ones that actually own the accounts. They're the ones with the usernames and passwords that actually have access and control access to those accounts. And even those accounts, the infrastructure, the core of where all that data resides is with the social networks themselves. So organizations are really the third party in all of this in terms of how they can actually govern it, making it very difficult. And then when we think about how social media is public, of course, Twitter is primarily a public channel. Facebook, we could consider semi-public depending on your privacy settings and how you're using hashtags and other things like that. But the overall point is that social media is distributing information and having conversations with larger and larger sets of people, meaning what you're posting out there is public rather than email where it's much more, can be kept internal. In addition to that, what that means is that any type of comment or data that anyone within your organization posts out potentially leaks confidential or sensitive information that you wanted to keep within your own organization. And then new interactive features, they're on social networks. They're setting new behavioral dynamics. You're able to like, you're able to recommend, you're able to retweet, and you're able to post and have full conversations with bigger and bigger communities. And so social media is creating new dynamics in terms of how we actually catch all this conversation and recreate it for legal and regulatory purposes and e-discovery purposes. And then the data is proliferating exponentially because it's not just the post itself, but it's all the metadata that's involved in it. And then in addition to that, there's photos and videos and new ways of communicating that are just basically extrapolating and expanding the amount of data that you need to capture and store. And then finally, social media, there are a lot of new external threats that are emerging. Malicious actors are figuring out ways to use social media for their own advantage, whether it's spear phishing campaigns starting on social, whether it's being able to actually take over social accounts and represent your organization, or even create own impersonating accounts that pretend to be your legitimate account and start taking traffic away from your actual customers. So there's just a number of different ways that social media is creating new challenges for your organization today.
And Nick, I take from this that it's multifunctional. It's representing things that stretch the current IT infrastructure from a security standpoint, as well as regulatory and legal perspectives. So we'll come back to that in terms of how we envision solutions emerging there to be able to address this multifunctional problem. But I wanted to come back to one of the things you mentioned earlier, which is the training aspect and kind of how do you build the awareness internally of some of these risk factors as well as the regulatory obligations? How do you do this, in advance of the major threat that emerges or the major event that transpires and causes harm? What are some of the methods that you've seen to be most effective in kind of building this internal awareness and developing a policy to address all of these risk factors?
Yeah, great question, and I love this image that I use. I laugh every time I look at it. I just think in some instances this is exactly what I want to do. I just want to take a megaphone and go up to that person and say, this is what you should have done. Why did you do this? But of course that's not at all what we should be doing. There's a lot of things that you can do to build and train and build the right behavior through the policies that you set and the ongoing support that you offer. And so what I see is basically where you need to start is making sure that you have the right guidelines defined and that you're enforcing them in the right ways. And so we talk about social media policies, but it's not just one social media policy. Guidelines need to exist in a number of different places, including all of your workplace policies, whether it's anti-discrimination, other ethical and anti-corruption policies like that. But then in addition to that, guidelines on your corporate social pages and communities, your external privacy policies, and even guidelines that are talking about company financial disclosures and how to go about doing that. So a number of different places that you need to be setting the right guidelines. And of course, there still is a lot that you can do within the social media policy, and this is the primary opportunity where you can really start to set and guide the behavior that you want to see. And I think one example that I think does a great job of this is Dell. Their global social media policy promotes active engagement by saying social media is a place to have conversations and build connections, whether you're doing it for Dell or for yourself. But it's also another tool you can use to build your brand. You just have to be doing it in the right way. And so what it does a good job is really setting the right tone and then making it very simple, offering 5 different areas and basic principles that Dell wants every employee to follow. And so it talks about protecting information, being transparent and disclosing, following the law, being responsible, and then being nice, having fun, and connecting. And so it's just a very simple way of thinking about exactly making sure that you're following the corporate policies, that you're in step with the guidelines and expectations that we have, but have fun and do it well. And I think it's a great overall message to be sending. But beyond policies, there's a lot of training that you can be doing too. But only about half of organizations today that we've reviewed have a formal ongoing training and awareness program for social media. And so you need to be having this full training and awareness program that is talking about both how you can engage and use social media effectively, but also educating employees on what the risks are, making sure that they're thinking about the security implications of links they click on, of social media accounts that they're setting up, all of that. So there's a number of things that they can do, but you just want to make sure that you're not being overly prescriptive, although in some cases maybe you need to be. But in general, you want to make sure that you're trying to guide the right behavior through all the different activities that you're setting up.
And Nick, I think the Dell example is a great one, and maybe one of the items that we can take as an action here would be, as follow-up, provide some other examples of policies which you consider to be best practice, how organizations have gotten in front of this. So that I think would be a good resource. We've also got some white papers that talk about the specific regulatory requirements per different industry. So we're happy to share that's available on the Proofpoint website. There was a question that came in earlier on that. So let's turn to both of you and look at what do you envision the remaining risks and concerns to be in 2015? What are the areas that you think organizations should continue to look toward in terms of specific risk vectors that they need to bring under control and look to make some investment in?
So I'll start off here again. This is another data slide from my research. And when we ask the question about how concerned are you about the following types of risk that social media exposes your firm to, in 2014, the top risk was legal and regulatory risk. It's a very high-level concern for most social media professionals, with 89% saying it's a concern or an extreme concern on a 1 to 5 scale. But of course, all these different types of risks are really important and there's a number of different issues that come up. And so when we think about what the concerns are going to be as we head into 2015 and by this time next year what's going to change, I don't think too much is going to change. I think all these concerns are going to remain fairly high. I think legal and regulatory risk will actually remain about the same, but I think that one area that I do see on the rise is information security risk. I think that 67% is definitely, over half of the organization is still, very concerned about those types of risks and about the threats. But I think that there are a number of different examples that are starting to highlight and show how dangerous some of the threats are out there. And as social media becomes more and more of an asset for an organization, they have to be thinking about how to protect that asset. And so that's why I think in 2015 we're going to see that risk concern start to grow even more.
Exactly, and I think the reality that we're seeing in our research and what we experience with our customers, and this is Devin from Nexgate, is the fact that their infrastructure is increasing exponentially, right? So that statistic about 300 accounts on average per brand is up 80% from just 2 years ago. So you're increasing this footprint, this surface area where your brand is represented. So you have to deal with the reputational risk of that, right, which is one of those top concerns. The amount of data that's exchanged on that is very, very high. So whether you're worried about inbound security threats or whether you're worried about the exchange of regulated data or compliance standards, that's only going to increase. And the fact that most people are becoming more and more aware of this infrastructure is really starting to impact teams. So you're going to see, just as Nick said, this is only going to increase in 2015.
Yeah, and
go ahead. Sure.
So yeah, I also, in addition to that concern, I think over the next year there's going to be more evolution than revolution. I think the overall social risk and compliance market and environment, it's going to evolve for sure, but we're not going to see anything too drastic change. That isn't to say that there's not going to be significant movement. It's only to say that I think that there's going to be a number of things that take place that are going to be iterations of things that have already been set up in 2014. So when we talk about this in terms of the regular guidance being pushed out, 2014 was a year where we saw a lot of new draft guidance being issued or even finalized. And I think that's going to continue in 2015. Particularly, just examples of this are with the FDA. The FDA issued 2 sets of draft guidance around social media last spring, and it closed the review period of those drafts this fall. And now it's taking time to really review all the feedback it's gathered and probably take into consideration a number of different aspects before finalizing it, but that finalized guidance is going to come out fairly soon, and when it does, it's going to have major implications for pharmaceutical and medical manufacturing firms that have to pay attention to that. And then in addition to that, other organizations in financial services have to be thinking about new guidance that's been rolled out with the SEC and again with the FTC. And FINRA finished its sweeps letters recently, but and actually overall they've reviewed them and had a pretty good positive reaction to the reviews, but there's going to be more implications now that they've had a chance to go through all those sweeps letters as well.
Yeah, that's I think a lot of evidence to indicate that level of change will continue. So what do we do now? What do you recommend organizations do now to get in front of this for 2015? So a couple of key points to leave folks with from both of you.
Yeah, so for me, I think that the first thing that you need to do is start figuring out and making sure that you understand your firm's current social presence. So a lot of organizations still don't have a full understanding of who's associated with your brand, how many brand accounts you have, which channels and publishing applications are actually being used to facilitate the social media engagement that is currently going on. In addition to that, you have employees that are onboarding and leaving your company at all times, and making sure that you're tracking how they're associating with your organization. There's a number of different ways that you just want to make sure that you're really reviewing how your organization is represented on social media and tracking that so that you understand which types of risk are most important for your firm and how you can best go about governing that. And then secondly, I think that you want to make sure that you consider the compliance obligations, not just as they exist today, because that's important, but they're still evolving a lot. So the more that you can start to think about how they're going to evolve, what's going to change, you want to be thinking about that as well as you start to set your compliance standards and the technologies that you're using for social media. I was actually speaking to a regulator from FINRA talking about some of the implications about archiving and capturing social media data today. And he even mentioned that there's a lot of issues with capturing social media and just pushing it to your email archive. So there are a number of different ways that social media is this new type of format that when you push it to an email archive, you're losing some of the metadata, the context, and it's more difficult to recreate that full conversation thread and investigate for when you need to. And so nothing that is going to happen now, but over time, how you're archiving and capturing the social media data is going to be an important aspect. So if you're thinking about basically what your resources are to capture and to meet compliance obligations now, make sure that you're thinking about what you're going to need next too.
And then, Nick, I think number 3, I think that's a good bridge over to some of the things that we can talk to from the standpoint of Proofpoint and Nexgate and capabilities that we can enable there. So why don't we transition over to that side?
Yeah, and so the final recommendation that I have is just you want to promote risk and compliance as a key priority of all social media initiatives that you have, as well as brand protection. Brand protection is typically it's either brand monitoring from a marketing perspective or it's brand protection thinking about domain names and management. But social media is a key part of all of this and can actually be used to your advantage for monitoring for external threats, for making sure that you're protecting your existing social infrastructure, all of that. So make sure that risk and compliance is really a central part of any social media conversation that you're having.
Nick, there's some great material, and I appreciate you sharing your insights and your time. I'm going to flip over to Devin to cover the back-end piece. If you could hang on the line, we've got some questions queued up here that we can answer in the last few minutes. So, again, thank you very much for sharing your insights.
No problem.
Thanks again, Nick. This is Devin, and I appreciate the kind of queue up of the next line in that, which, from our perspective, is really talking about how technology fits into that spectrum. Right? We talked about people, process, really needing to kind of build that view out, and that next layer is really the guardrails around that infrastructure, and that's really where Nexgate, as part of Proofpoint, fits in that environment, which is understanding that just like your other communication channels, there's a technology stack that needs to be deployed to protect that environment. So the easy way to think about that is early technologies that people have in their social media technology stack are listening platforms for analytics, publishing platforms, whether you call them social relationship management, social customer care, social selling tools, are all designed to help you drive that frontline business. But just like in your email world, you probably don't use Marketo for anti-spam or compliance, in your social media environment, you definitely need to have security and controls that are dedicated from a leading vendor that helps you do those things by putting guardrails around your accounts, helping you track those accounts so that you always know what is your real one, what is your not real one, what's authorized versus unauthorized, and then being able to protect the account from both that inbound content, bad actors trying to compromise that account, and then all the way through to dealing with the content that is going out so that you can apply policies on that, and being able to intelligently archive, just like Nick said, you need to be able to retain both the context of the content as it goes in from an archiving perspective, but also know what happened to that content. So instead of a supervisor having to sort through 10,000 different conversations, he can highlight the ones that may be a FINRA risk or may have a different type of risk in that environment. And so that's really the layer that Nexgate as part of Proofpoint is focused on, is providing a dedicated security and compliance platform that handles that slew of risks that kind of come in that environment and helps put guardrails around your accounts, around your social media programs so that you can more safely invest. If we go from there, just a couple of examples of how that's played out for real customers in the real world. And I think it's an easy way to kind of think of this from a communication paradigm. A lot of people kind of think of social as this nebulous thing, but really you can divide it into two areas of risk, things that are attacking your brand on social media and attacking your accounts. And then you can think about things like compliance, which is how you're presenting yourself, how you're communicating content and making sure you're in line with those things. So let's take a security use case to start off with. So NBC has been a long-time customer of ours. We presented with them some of their results from Sochi. They knew going into the Olympics that in addition to all of the rest of their infrastructure, they would be a target for hacks, for malware, for spam, and they wanted to make sure on social, knowing that social would be a big part of this Olympics for them, that they were protected in that environment. So for the Olympics, we protected 66 key accounts that they identified, everything from NBC News, NBC Sports, all the way to key talent, Today Show talent, other reporting talent that was there. What they were able to do during just that 2 weeks was automatically handle 24,000 pieces of risky content, everything from spam and spam with malware links and social engineering attacks delivered via direct messages, all the way to pornography and regulated data being inappropriately transmitted, whether that's PII or people's account names and passwords, all happening on their accounts. Being able to auto-handle that, not rely on third-party moderation, not rely on third-party people to deal with that was a key use case for them. And that's very, very similar to what you would see in an email environment. They estimated that it saved them 100 man days of work to automate that process. Additionally, being able to understand and prevent the attacks on their infrastructure, on the accounts themselves, was a key value for them. So they found multiple instances of issues on those accounts. So that's just an example from the security side. If we flip very quickly to regulatory side, you'll see that lots of organizations are enabling social selling. They should be enabling social selling. The important thing in those environments is they should have tools that help them manage the content, help them facilitate their social selling programs, but they should be thinking about layers of security around that as well. If you're just relying on people and simplified dictionaries and keywords, it's very hard to get accuracy and true security around the efforts that you've made in there. So this is an example where there was a real FFIEC violation for one of our clients. It went through all the people-based workflows that they had, all of their social selling tools, and the reality was they weren't able to detect this because it wasn't about what was said, it was about what was missing from what was said, which was the disclaimer link. So in that type of environment, you need things like natural language processing, true security policies and compliance policies that understand the regulation, understand the context, and then understand if something's not there that's supposed to be there, it's detected accurately and caught. And that is an automated guardrail that you need to be able to scale. Additionally, you need to make sure people are actually using the workflow that you want them to use in that environment. So it's very easy to bypass whatever apps are mandated because there are no controls looking at those apps to make sure people actually adhere to that. And so that's another component of this, of having a control framework and then actually being able to enforce against that control framework. So you can say, if I want people to go through my workflow, whichever one of our partners it is, I can enforce that policy and make sure they don't bypass that and they're not using native logins to the social media account, or they're not using things like Twitter for iPhone when they should be putting their content through the appropriate supervised workflow. And then making sure on the back end, thinking from a full retention perspective, that all of that is captured in the conversation stream that you send into the archive, so that when you're looking at it, not only can you find things that were potential violations, but you can also see what happened to them, how they were handled, so that you can actually have that full proof of policy from when it was enforced all the way through to retention. So if we go through quickly, and then we'll switch to kind of Q&A here, how we do that, I think it's important to note, and the key attributes here are really that the social discover, social patrol applications are all SaaS-based. They leverage the APIs of the platforms natively. They don't require you to disintermediate any traffic to the social networks. They allow you to transparently set security, whether you're looking at enterprise social platforms or enterprise 2.0 social media, or whether you're looking at external public-facing social media, and then do that in a way that's transparent to the end users so that security and those guardrails are actually running for them without interrupting their ability to interact with the accounts, whether that is a corporate marketing team working on the main brand page or whether that's an agent or an advisor working from home or working from one of their other locations, making sure that they're always protected and not disintermediating what they're trying to do on the social accounts. And so that's really how we've been able to do that to date. So I'll leave with that because I want to make sure we have time for Q&A, but if you have more questions around that, feel free to follow up with us directly. You can check out the websites and see the content there, and I'll turn it over for Q&A.
Terrific. Thank you, Devin. So let's open it up and take some of the questions that have come in to the chat panel, but again, we'll answer those that we don't have the time to cover here during the course of the hour. The first question that I see come in is specifically regarding litigation and the potential concern of overpreservation of social content, and specifically, do the courts request social data for custodians for a litigation case? I mean, clearly there's a growing body of case law that's involving social content, a lot of employment disputes, but either one of you want to take a shot at that in terms of the litigation impact?
Yeah, so it's a question that I think the case law is still developing, as probably my answer will be to some of the other compliance questions. But yeah, the case law is developing, and I think that there are instances where that data and information is being requested, but there are issues in terms of actually getting access to that data, just because in a lot of cases they've tried to push Facebook to give them access to information for legal purposes, and they are very hesitant to do that without the permission of the actual account holder. And so there have been one or two instances that have kind of pushed the legal case forward in terms of actually forcing Facebook to hand over that information, but the actual stipulations and the number of times that has happened are very, very limited. And so overall, still something that's developing, but from kind of an organizational standpoint too, it is something that is going to be requested more frequently because it is just any other form of communication that needs to be if you have certain capture and archive requirements for other types of communications, like with FINRA, for example, then social media can be another source that you'll need to provide information for.
So just one quick thing to add there, and I think it's, if you don't control this information, then what is the process you would use to collect it if it's required for litigation? And that's where a lot of court cases have basically centered on the challenge of proving the authenticity of data that's collected reactively. It's very difficult to use traditionally discovery tools to provide some of the fidelity that the courts are going to be asking for. So let's move to question 2, which is how does social archiving in Proofpoint integrate with other data types archived in Proofpoint? Can retention policies and storage repositories be segregated for each data type, but included in federated search? Let me take the first shot at that because that kind of gets to some of the native things within the archive. And the first piece is that, yes, we can identify the social content that's within the archive. You can either include or exclude that content type from search results, so you can isolate it through the use of a specific piece of metadata. But the key thing is that it's always accessible and available for search. And so if you're searching across multiple custodians, you want to see every instance of Twitter or Facebook or what have you, you have that ability to look not only within a search for an individual mailbox or custodian, but also the ability to search across the entire archive. So within the context of an archive, it is essentially just like any other form of information. It's text extracted and searchable like email or anything else. Devin, you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I think importantly on top of that is as data comes into the system, so as we talked about when policies are enforced on it, all of those rich meta tags will be added to that content. So when you're looking for it, you can see what application it came from. You can see what channel first and foremost, right? Was it Facebook or Twitter? You can see how it appears in the conversation, right, what is the parent ID that it was associated with. So if it's a comment on a post, you can detect that. But even more importantly, you can look and kind of do supervisory work very simply by typing in what type of content you're looking for. So as opposed to trying to find FINRA violations by typing in the word guarantee or other keywords, you can just type in FINRA, and up at the top of the list will be any social media conversations on the platform you filter to that were triggered and tagged as potential FINRA risk. And then within those, you can also see which ones actually had enforcement actions already taken on them. So a supervisor can very quickly go in and see anything that happened on Twitter or anything that happened on LinkedIn that was a potential FINRA violation. Was it resolved or does it need further follow-up and review from a supervisory perspective? So that end-to-end kind of enforcement all the way through to retention is a very powerful thing to be able to add into the mix so that a supervisor isn't going crazy with the amount of data that's going to be in the archive from social.
Great point. So two more questions here real quickly. The first went directly to Nick. Nick, is there any existing guidance or anything in the pipeline from insurance and finance regulatory bodies on their stance regarding testimonials, endorsements, and likes on social media?
The SEC has actually started tackling these issues. They've released some guidance around it. So yes, there is guidance, and it's starting to form around this. Still a lot of issues, of course, around how to actually make sure that you're using it and managing all of your third-party content. In terms of your own testimonials and things like that, what the key message that I've seen is that it basically needs to be independent, right? So if there's any sense that you had an influence over that third-party content or testimonial, then that's when there'll be issues. If it's completely independent and there's no connection to or influence that you have over that content, then there are ways for you to actually take advantage of that post.
Awesome. Well, everyone, I think we're approaching the top of the hour, so there's a ton of additional questions, many related to security that we're going to respond to via email. So thank you for sending those in, and we will respond to those very promptly. Thank you both, Nick and Devin, for sharing your time and your insights. Very valuable information, so I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And before you go, I think we want to first make sure that you stay online to complete the survey. There's some very important questions in there in terms of specific areas that may be of more or greater concern than others so that we can appropriately follow up with the right information. So I would really appreciate it if you could fill out that survey. And with that, I thank you, and I will turn you back over to Marvin.
Great. Thanks so much, Robert. And I do want to post our survey, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes today's Proofpoint webinar entitled Social Media Risk and Compliance in 2015. Again, thank you for joining us. You should now all see a survey in your slide frame area. Please take a moment to complete that survey as your feedback is important to us. Once you complete the survey, you may disconnect and have a great day, everyone.